Welcome to Motivated to Lead podcast, helping you become a better leader. I'm your host, Mark Klingsheim. Hi everyone, Mark Klingsheim with CIC Partners. Glad you could join us again this week for a conversation with Rod Brenneman. Rod is an experienced CEO, has served as CEO for Butterball as well as Seaboard Foods. At Seaboard, he took the company from a startup within the corporation to over $1.7 billion in revenue. He served on a number of boards, both corporate as well as nonprofit, and has served as an operating partner with private equity as well as an advisor to VC firms. Looking forward to our conversation with Rod today. Well, it's great to have Rod Brenneman join us today for a conversation. And Rod, we appreciate you taking time out to talk to us. And I guess first off, can you give us just a little bit of an overview of your career?
Sure, I'd be happy to, and it's nice to be here. So, I was a finance major in college with a minor in accounting, and took the CPA exam and was fortunate enough to pass it, and went to work in public accounting out of college. So that was the start of my career. I spent 3 years in public accounting, and then went to work in the financial area for a large diversified agribusiness and transportation company called Seaboard Corporation, and spent the bulk of my career with Seaboard. I spent about 5 years there in financial roles, and then we started an integrated pork production and processing company called Seaboard Foods, and I was part of the group that helped start that, and worked in that company. Grew it from a startup. Really, when I left there, it was a $1.7 billion company, so it was a rapid growth exercise, and served various roles: finance, administration, CFO briefly, and then the last 10 or so years as president and CEO of that company. From there, Seaboard, the company I was with, bought 50% of Butterball, the turkey company, and part of my role was to serve on the board of Butterball, and we made some changes with the CEO there, and they asked me if I would go do a 3-year turnaround there, and so I went from Seaboard to Butterball and spent 3 years getting a team in place, executing the strategy, and then transitioned it. And my last board meeting there was in May of 2014. Since then, I've been involved with a number of boards. I serve on a number of boards, and a private equity group as they call it an operating partner, and a venture capital firm here in Kansas City as well as an investment advisor. So along with some nonprofit and other things that I'm sure we'll dig into here a little bit.
Sure. Great. Well, your career throughout, you've kind of spanned a number of areas that I'm sure our audience has interest in. But I guess, if you were to go back and talk to a 22-year-old Rod Brenneman, and knowing what you know now, what advice would you give him?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think if I was talking to a 22-year-old me, I would say a couple of things. One is make sure that the basics that you have learned through your upbringing, whatever is important to you, you hold firm to that. And in my case, high integrity, ethics, those kinds of things. But the other thing I would suggest is that, work hard and focus on what's in front of you. I think so many times we try to think way ahead, and where is this getting me and all that. I would tell myself, just focus on what you're doing, do it with excellence, work hard, and the rest of it takes care of itself.
Is there any advice that you would ignore that you received?
I don't know if I have any advice I would ignore. I probably didn't listen to the advice I got as much as I should have.
Sure.
So I don't know that I would ignore any advice that I got.
Are there some people that you can think back that were great influences on your life, mentors? How important has it been as far as having those people around you through your career?
Yeah, I would say that's extremely important, and quite frankly, still is to me today. I've still got mentors in my life. Early on, my father, I think, was probably my chief mentor, and that's probably pretty typical. He modeled, what hopefully I was able to do throughout my life. But along the way, whether it's people I interacted with through the positions I had, or even today, I've got mentors. I just met with one yesterday morning for coffee, and they're almost becoming at this point more life mentors than anything. But I think you go through phases where your mentors are more focused on work and career and things like that, and then somewhere along the way you focus maybe a little bit more on life mentors as well.
So when you meet with mentors in kind of different stages of your career, have you directed those conversations, or have you had certain things that you want to cover as far as with them, depending on what's going on with your work and life?
Yeah, great question. I think it's been some of both. I think sometimes I just, listen and try to learn, and we have an interchange, and through that, I think that's one way of learning. And then other times there might have been specific things that I had questions about or concerns, or that wanted to inquire and get their thoughts on.
Any books that you would say are must-reads, at least from your viewpoint, that have had a big impact on you and you think would be beneficial for somebody to pick up and read it and then have it on their bookshelf?
Yeah, it's that's also a really good question. I'm a person of faith, so this will sound a little crazy, but if you had to say, okay, what are your top 3 books? The Bible's got to be one of them for me. So, I would say, looking back over time, Purpose-Driven Life is a great book for, I think, young people to read, to focus their time and efforts. And then, I'm a big fan of Collins. I like a lot of the stuff he writes. I love his book, Great by Choice. I think he's got a way of taking concepts and kind of boiling them down into pretty simple 2 or 3 things to, nuggets to take away. So those would be, Great by Choice would be on my list for sure.
Great. Tell me a little bit about how your leadership style has developed over the years. Take me back to kind of that first leadership role that you had, and then kind of how you think about leadership now comparably.
That's a great question. I think early on, the tendency for everyone as they step into a leadership role is to think you need to know everything, right? Everybody's looking to you. And I think that's probably one of the biggest fallacies that are out there. The fact is, it's more important to really, really focus on developing the team around you. And I think two things that I learned along the way, I learned a bunch of things along the way, but 2 key things were, number one is the importance of communication. And, today we focus so much on email and texting and everything else. And I think there are, I think there are things that are lost in that. It's still a great tool to use, but I would shy away from using that all the time. I think face-to-face communication with people is priceless. And most of the problems that I've seen through my career, I don't want to say all, but most, have to do with a failure in communication. So many things can be resolved that way. So that's one thing. The other thing is, listen first and speak second. So many times you get in meetings, I still see it in the boardroom today, where people feel like the more they talk, the more that maybe the smarter they think they are. And I think that actually the opposite is true. I think the more you talk, you're just telling yourself what you already know. And to the extent you can listen and digest what others are saying and then respond accordingly, I think it makes your leadership better. and I think it makes the organization better.
That's good. So what advice would you give somebody as they're maybe putting together their first senior team? What would you say they should be thinking about as they put that team together?
Yeah, I mean, clearly the chemistry of the team is very important. Making sure everybody's on the same page, looking at whatever the task is ahead of you, that everybody understands and sees things, not necessarily exactly the same, but strategically you're moving in the same direction. And if that's not the case, I think the first thing you have to do is figure out, how do you get everyone on the same page? And because otherwise you're sort of trading off on things. So I think it's important that the culture, chemistry, and then the other thing is making sure people understand their roles on the team, and then communicating back and forth. I think it's really, really important that you get everyone together. And the frequency can be different depending on the circumstances, but making sure people are sharing what's going on in their portion of the team that's happening, so that everybody starts to see the bigger picture develop.
So when you talk about culture, how do you impact culture as a leader? What's your biggest? You talked about communication, and I know that's part of it, but tell me a little bit more about your thoughts around that.
Yeah, communication is a key to it, but the other key really is to model what you want from people, how you want them to act, how you want them to respond. I think actions, the old saying, actions speak louder than words, and I think it's true. I mean, people see what you do regardless of what you say, and so I would say combine good communication with acting that lines up with that, and you've got a recipe to really change and drive the culture.
Right. Being in the business that I am, I always ask this question: what are your favorite interview questions?
I like to really understand what drives the person. How do they respond to challenges, opportunities? And what's their motivation? Because depending on a person's motivation may make it a good fit or not so good fit. I don't know that I have a standard question that I like to ask, but I think a good dialogue on how they respond in certain situations is always good.
That's good. Yeah, as a part of our practice, where that's a big part of what we look at is how somebody's wired, because if you put them in the wrong role, they can definitely cause a lot of disruption, and get them in the right place, and they will thrive. Are there any habits, beliefs that you have developed over maybe even the last 5 years that you wish you would have developed earlier?
Yeah, I don't know if I habits or beliefs. I think again, the things I learned along the way, the key things that I've already mentioned are, and I don't think I did very well at this early on, was being more a listener and a communicator, as opposed to thinking I had to figure it all out. And I don't know if that's a habit or a belief, but I think it's important. And I try to tell myself whether I'm sitting around a boardroom table or whatever, listen to what other people are saying, and then try to respond and react accordingly. And I've learned a lot from just listening to other people, and it's changed sometimes the way I think about certain situations.
Good. What keeps you motivated in your work? What is it that keeps you your energy level up, and that you're engaged at this stage in your career? Give us some thoughts around that.
Yeah, the motivation for me is about making an impact, and somewhere along my journey, and I think everyone's journey, you go through different phases of life, and there's the early phase where you're just trying to provide, right, for your family or whatever it might be. and you're trying to build, you're sort of focused on success. And I'm sure you've heard the talk about shifting from success to significance. And so I'm in the significance stage. I want to make sure whatever I spend my time on and how I approach things has an impact. If I'm on a board and I don't feel like I'm making a contribution anymore, then it's time to get off that board. So for me, it's all about now, what kind of an impact can I make, not only on the organization, but on other people around me, young people, and how can I give back, so to speak.
Talking about giving back, talk to me a little bit about how boards have been a part of your giving back, as well as helping, whether it's nonprofits or other boards. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, serving on a board is a real opportunity and privilege that I've had, and I've served on several nonprofit boards and continue to do that today, and am reasonably engaged with one of them, very engaged, actually. So to me, it's a way of hopefully using some of the talents and things I've learned over the years to have an impact on other organizations. The same is true, though, really in a for-profit context. I've been fortunate to be exposed to a lot of different circumstances, and quite frankly, probably learned way more from the failures than the successes, and probably had way more failures than successes. But I'm hoping that through serving on boards now, I can use what I've learned along the way and help organizations maybe avoid some of those in certain circumstances, or at least respond and react appropriately in other circumstances.
What would you say to somebody who, and I have a number of executives that are at a stage where they say, I haven't served on a board, I've been focused on my career, and I'd like to do that. What advice would you give them?
Yeah, it's interesting. I get asked that question all the time. How do you get involved with boards, and how can I start that journey? The business you're in is one way. You network, and you connect with firms like the firm you're with, and sometimes they can be helpful in that process. But I think the other thing that for me, they've all sort of just come to me. I've not actively pursued any. I think you put yourself in a position, you make it known to people, but you also, not everybody is cut out with the background to serve on a board. And I think boards today are very selective on the roles that they want from board members, whether they're using a matrix approach or whatever that might be. So I would say be patient, but make sure you network and let people know. And then if you have the ability to connect with firms such as yours, that's another way to kind of get your name in front of people.
Right. Any parting advice that you'd give to an executive, whether they're earlier in the career or mid-career, that you think would be helpful? Yeah,
I think people always ask, well, what are some quotes that you really like or whatever? And one of them for me, and it sort of ties into a lot of the things I mentioned about working hard, focusing on where you're at and all that, is I love Covey's quote, and he's got a bunch of them, but the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And my father taught me that, when I was a lot younger, and it's stuck with me all this time. I think if you do that, whatever that main thing is, it's different at different phases of your life, perhaps, and perhaps not. But for each person, you define where you're at and what that main thing is, and work hard, have a good attitude, and I think the rest takes care of itself.
Great. Well, thanks, Rod, for your insights, and appreciate your time today. And as always, I wish you continued success in your career.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your time as well.
Thank you for listening to the Motivated to Lead podcast. Please subscribe on iTunes. You can also see a video version of this interview at motivatedtolead.com. This podcast is brought to you by CIC Partners, helping you find your next great leader.